Visions of Mana is just around the corner, and recently while I've been streaming I get asked a lot of questions about the Mana series, like what is the Mana series, where did it start, how many games are there, which ones are good, if I wanted to play one before Visions came out, which one should I play first, and a bunch more questions like that. So I thought why not take the initiative and give you guys a video on everything you need to know about the Mana series, so let's get into it. So believe it or not, the Mana series actually started as a Final Fantasy spin-off, first released as Final Fantasy Adventure back on the Game Boy in 1991 by Square, or then known as Squaresoft. It was a game that kind of blended the RPG elements of Final Fantasy with more action-heavy elements of games like The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, and was actually a pretty celebrated game in and of its time. But it wasn't until the second game in the franchise, so Seiken Densetsu 2 as it would have been known in Japan, that the franchise really started to take off. Instead, it was 1993's Secret of Mana for the Super Nintendo that really allowed the Mana series to take hold of its own kind of IP, as opposed to being a spin-off of Final Fantasy. Created by Koichi Ishii, who had already created or helped to create the first three Final Fantasy games, he wanted to separate himself and make a game more within his own vision that incorporated real-time combat elements and separate itself from Final Fantasy as a whole. And he did so with aplomb with Secret of Mana. Secret of Mana tells the story of, well, the world it's set in really, rather than the individual characters, but stars Randy, Prim and Pipoi as they try to defend the world from an evil empire, trying to take control of a mana fortress which had been made against the wishes of the gods using the world's mana resource, and so beasts from ancient times were sent to destroy those who would wish harm upon the planet itself. Secret of Mana was massively popular on the Super Nintendo, worldwide, not just within Japan, and holds its own as one of the most celebrated RPGs of its time, alongside the likes of Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger, Earthbound. There are some incredible games out there for the Super Nintendo, and the fact that Secret of Mana held its own amongst such massive titles goes to show just how good a game it really was. Seiken Densetsu 3, now we know as Trials of Mana, was released in 1995, but never actually came out for us over in the West until it was released in the Collection of Mana, all the way until 2019, and it's a real shame that it was never released over here, because again, it was released to universal acclaim, with people claiming it was one of the best games that they'd ever seen on the Super Nintendo, having a really cohesive story for its time, and having action mixed with RPG elements in a way that had never really been done before. Differently from Secret of Mana, Trials of Mana actually had 6 different main characters. You had Duran, Reese, Angela, Charlotte, Kevin, and Hawkeye, all of which kind of covered different jobs that you would see in various RPGs, but you were only ever allowed to choose 3 of them, which warranted the idea of multiple playthroughs so that you could go through the game and experience different things in different ways. And this was augmented by its job system, where you could go down either a light or dark path for each particular character and learn more about how they could behave in different ways, again giving you pause to kind of want to play the game more than once. One of the exciting things about Mana, or Seiken Densetsu 2 and 3, is the idea that you could play it as a multiplayer game. Because it had action elements to it, you could give a controller to a friend and kind of experience an RPG together, which is something that had never really been done up until that point, and is something that you can still experience now. Sadly, this didn't quite go the way of its intention with Dawn of Mana, which is technically Seiken Densetsu 4, released on the PS2 in 2006. Dawn of Mana kind of eschewed a lot of what made the Mana series what it was. It became a solely single-player focused game, and also kind of abandoned a lot of its hybridization with the traditional JRPG genre, instead turning into just a simple 3D action-adventure game. And unfortunately, because of that, it just didn't quite have the same impact that games like it previously had had. It sold pretty well, and people said that its graphics and its music were really nice, as they always had been for their time, but people said that the controls were awkward, the game was difficult and frustratingly so, not in a nice way, the story was really trite, and the leveling system made no sense. So unfortunately, Dawn of Mana was kind of a bit of a misnomer in the main Mana series. The Mana series also had a long list of spin-offs that came away from the series as well, and they did it in two different ways. You had regular spin-offs and then you had remakes as well. So we're going to cover the spin-offs first. So you had Legend of Mana, released in 1999 for the PS1, that kind of changed the way the game played in order to have artifacts that represented different locations that the player would place on the map and then explore those areas. And that's actually available on PS4 and Xbox, etc. now, if you wanted to go and look at that one. Then you also have Children of Mana and Heroes of Mana, which were games released on the DS, and kind of take a more RTS approach and kind of expand on the multiplayer aspects that people really enjoyed when it came to Secret of Mana and Trials of Mana as well. So if you wanted to explore the DS games in particular, that's a very, very different beast. But you also have a lot of mobile titles that were released as well. So you had Friends of Mana, which was a multiplayer game. You had Circle of Mana, which was a card battling system. Then you had Rise of Mana, which was another action RPG. And then you had Echoes of Mana, which was released as recently as 2022. And it was a typical kind of gacha RPG title. But sadly, it was closed within a year of it even releasing because it just didn't perform as well. And the name and the brand of the Mana series just didn't carry the same weight as it did in the 90s. Then of course you have the remakes, and one of these games has actually been remade twice. So the first of which here we have is Sword of Mana. Sword of Mana is a remake for the Game Boy Advance that is a remake of the original Final Fantasy adventure, but with the branding of the Mana series. And it's a pretty good game. It's actually my first ever Mana game that I ever played before Secret of Mana or any of that stuff. I played Sword of Mana. And it's fun, it's cute, it does the job very well. It was received pretty well. It didn't do badly, but it was still just another RPG. It didn't do much in its own way to kind of stand out. Final Fantasy Adventure actually received a second remake in 2016, which is very unusual for a game of its age, and was released as Adventures of Mana on mobile platforms and as well as Japanese Vitas. And much like Sword of Mana, it was okay, it was received okay, but being a mobile style title, it very much kind of sits in that same area of weird touchscreen controls that the likes of Final Fantasy 5 and 6, 4, 5 and 6 remakes did for iOS, and it still retained a lot of what we knew from Sword of Mana and the original Final Fantasy adventure, but it kind of felt like a retcon to Sword of Mana because the creators wanted it to feel more like its origin than a brand new game entirely. So if you see stuff from Mana games in the future that reference Final Fantasy Adventure, chances are the iconography will refer to this particular game. Then of course we have the Secret of Mana remake, which was released in 2018 for PS4, Switch, modern consoles at the time. And this one was a big deal and is kind of notorious for being so, because people of my age, people who had never got to experience Secret of Mana the first time around, knew what a big deal it was. So for Secret of Mana to get a remake, people wanted to play it. And it was a bit too close to its source material in that it was very, very archaic in a lot of its choices. Didn't really bring along a lot of the modern upgrades you would come to like love from those original games, but also kind of threw in a bunch of bugs and crashes and things that you don't want to see from a modern version of a beloved game. So this one is definitely not one I would go to first if you want to play Secret of Mana, but if you have already played the original and you just kind of want to see it through a new lens and see if it really was as bad as they say it was, then maybe give this one a go. And then in 2020, we got the Trials of Mana remake. So, as I said, the only time that we'd ever gotten to play Trials of Mana as a Westerner without emulation or anything was in 2019's Collection of Mana. But this was a full-blown remake of Seiken Densetsu 3, and I adore this game. I have nothing but nice things to say about it. I think that it really captures the essence of what makes Mana really popular. It has all of the old school stuff that you'd come to love. So the ring menu, for example, which is something you see in every Mana game, is present here and is not something you would normally see in a modern game, but it works in this context. And it does everything without being afraid to just be a video game, and it's fun and it's silly at times and it's all fully voice acted. It's not a game that's gonna like win awards the world over, but if you want something that's just fun and frivolous and just gets the job done as far as being a cool old school RPG done, look no further than the Trials of Mana remake. So what are the common through lines when it comes to the Mana series? We've gone over every title in the franchise now. The things that you can expect when you come to a Mana title, whether it be Visions of Mana or one of the previously released games, is it's definitely got a distinctive art style. It's more in line with your 90s anime vibes, which is something I really love. As someone who isn't much of an anime person, but really enjoys things like Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball and stuff like that, it definitely evokes that same kind of stylization. You'll often find that the characters have a very unique character progression system, and it's very malleable, and there's a lot of room for player input in how they want their party to look. Certainly in the later games in the franchise, I'm looking at Trials of Mana more predominantly here, but I've already played the demo for Visions of Mana, and that's obviously going to bring some of that to the table as well. The ways in which you learn magic and the ways in which you use items are through the ring menu, which I've mentioned previously, and it's something that you'll always see in a Mana game, and it just works. It's very intuitive, but it's all old school. So realistically, if you want a game that's not necessarily trying to be this sprawling, epic, massively convoluted storylines, all that all converge in different ways, in different places, and you just want to experience the RPG fun and joy that you would have gotten back in the 90s or even the early 2000s, then the Mana series definitely has you covered for that. If you ask me, if you want to explore the Mana series before Visions of Mana comes out, or perhaps even afterwards, and you decide you really like the game and you want to kind of explore the rest of the series, there are two places that I would stop. The first of which is the Collection of Mana. Collection of Mana has Final Fantasy Adventure, the very original in it, Secret of Mana, and Trials of Mana, the original, not the remake. And I think that it's a really good place for people to kind of explore what makes the Mana series what it is. If you're not opposed to retro-coded RPGs or like the 8-bit and 16-bit era, then you'll have a lot of joy when it comes to the Collection of Mana. But I don't think it's the only game that I would play here. If anything, there's one that I would play more. In case it wasn't clear, I am a huge fan of Trials of Mana. I really do think that this is the pinnacle of the Mana series up until this point, and the remake showcases everything in a really neat package. Beautiful game, beautiful music, isn't trying too hard to be something more than what it is, and it just captures that essence in a way that is very hard to describe without just telling you to go and play it. I believe Trials of Mana is actually available on PS Plus if you have that available. If not, I'm sure that you'd be able to find it on any number of consoles. I actually played it originally on the Switch during lockdown and then enjoyed it so much that I ended up going through 100%ing it and platinuming the game when it came back out for play, or when it came up on PlayStation Plus. So I've played this game enough to know how much I like it, and I really do think that if you gave this game a try, you'd love it too. This of course brings me to Visions of Mana, which is releasing at the end of this month and is a game that I'm looking forward to playing, although the demo had just come out recently and I have posted my full thoughts on that demo in another video if you want to check that out through the link in the description box below. I'm not sure how people are going to receive Seiken Densetsu 5. I'm excited for it, but having played the demo, I definitely feel like the combat felt clunkier than it did in the Trials of Mana remake, and I think it's great to see the Mana series have a resurgence. Like when that first trailer dropped, I was extremely excited about it, but having played it, I'm kind of concerned with how the full game's gonna pan out, and I hope that it goes down the road of Seiken Densetsu 3 and not 4, because Dawn of Mana is not a very good game. But I do have a lot of hope for it. I think that the job system, the class system in it is really robust. I think the ability seeds and the way in which you learn new abilities adds for a lot of player agency, and I always love the customizability within the games that I'm playing. The characters are very likable from what I can see. As long as people's expectations aren't too high for a game like this, I think there's a lot of potential for somebody's new favourite. So yeah, that's pretty much my everything you need to know about the Mana series. If I have a recommendation, go out and buy yourself Collection of Mana and the Trials of Mana remake, and then Visions of Mana, depending on how that turns out as well, of course. And then if you have any questions about the Mana series, I would be happy to answer them. You can either come and join me over on Discord, or you can leave a comment here, and I'll try to respond to as many comments as I can if you have questions about the series from someone who's played a large majority of the games within it. And if you're not sure what to comment, then just type the word algorithm, because it's extremely helpful to me as a content creator, and I'm very grateful for you for doing so. Thank you ever so much for joining me on today's video. If you've liked what you've seen here, then perhaps consider leaving a thumbs up on the video and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And of course, let me know in the comments below what your favourite Mana game is. We know what mine is, I'd love to know what yours is too, and let's make a conversation out of it, because it's nothing I love more than talking to you guys. So thank you all very much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care everyone, bye bye.